Good evening. My name is Chris Engel, and I'm a co-founder of the Liberation of Education. It is my distinct honor to introduce Patrick Gibbons. Patrick is the Public Affairs Manager for Step Up for Students. Patrick is a former public school history teacher and a 15-year veteran in the school choice movement. Patrick has worked in Oklahoma, Arizona, Nevada, and Florida to advance educational opportunities for families. The title of Patrick's presentation tonight is Florida's Changing Education Landscape. In the presentation, Patrick will touch on things like how Florida is a majority minority state with nearly 1.6 million students in attending a school other than their assigned neighborhood school. He'll ask a question: how did Florida get so far in the school choice movement, and where did it all begin? Patrick notes that opponents claim school choice is rooted in racism, but Florida's history demonstrates that Florida's private school sector has been serving minorities well for more than a century, and at a time when public schools would not. I'm going to turn it over to Patrick. Patrick?
Thank you so much for that kind introduction. I really appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and switch to my screen sharing mode here. Give me 1 second. And I'm going to put up my presentation. And I hope that is showing for everybody. And Chris, if it's not, let me know.
I can see it.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So as you mentioned, I'm going to explore today where Florida is in school choice, where it's come from, sort of the results that we've seen, and then we're going to explore one of the major arguments that school choice opponents have against creating charter schools and school vouchers and tax credit scholarships and ESA programs. There's a number of arguments they give, obviously, from academics to discrimination to one of the main ones that we've seen in the last couple of years is that school choice is rooted in race, especially vouchers are rooted in racism and racial segregation. So first, before we start exploring that argument, we've got to see where Florida came from and where we are today. So today, there's 1.6 million students in the state of Florida that are utilizing some form of school choice program. That means 52% of K-12 students are attending their traditional zoned neighborhood school. The most popular option in Florida is charter schools with 341,000 students, followed by public school open enrollment rules, choice and magnet programs, private school students paying on their own. Home education in Florida has really exploded in the last couple of years, especially with the COVID protocols and restrictions in place. And followed by, there's a large number of students using school choice scholarships to attend private schools. So Step Up for Students, a nonprofit that I work for, and I also write for our blog Reimagined. We have almost 191,000 students on various programs. We offer programs for income-based students. These have income-based restriction, low-income, middle-income students. We have a program for students with special needs. We have a program for children who are bullied. We have a program for public school students who've been struggling with reading, and as a scholarship that helps parents pay for tutoring and textbooks and curriculum related to improving reading and literacy. So we can see this growth over the years. And, another thing you should know is that, especially with our income-based programs, a lot of our student population in Florida is majority minority. This is our income-based scholarship programs. You can see that about 73% of the students using our programs are non-white. So critics that claim that these programs are really for white kids to escape integrated public schools, they don't know what I'm talking about. In Florida, the majority of students using scholarships tend to be minorities, and they're very happy with the choices that they're making. So we've got a large number of students in Florida choosing school choice. We've got a large minority population choosing school choice. So, the academic wise, how's it improved? Opponents say it doesn't improve at all. It makes things worse. Well, Florida, we've seen graduation rates improve significantly across the board. We've seen reading scores improve from 1998, before Florida got its first voucher, and which happened in 1999, until the latest NAEP score in 2019. And again, the math scores improved. And Florida's improvements, by the way, were larger than the national average. And I'm not saying that these improvements happen because of school choice, but school choice has played a role in some way, in some fashion. Florida also improved academic accountability and has improved the amount of funding that goes to schools, public schools, and the private school vouchers as well, tax credit scholarships. The Urban Institute recently found that kids on our tax credit scholarship, that was for low-income kids, they saw improvement in the number of students who obtained bachelor's degrees. So there's attending the program, especially if you're on the program for a long time, you saw a bigger chance of earning a bachelor's degree in the end. And David Figlio and Cassandra Hart have shown that competitive effect thing. That's something a lot of conservatives like to argue, is that you create a competitive program and public schools will improve too. And that's actually what we've seen in Florida. And the public schools, especially schools located close to nearby private schools who are going to be able to accept low-income students, these private schools, or these public schools, see improvements in math and reading and reductions in suspensions and absences of students. And these improvements happen over time with these programs ramping up in scale. Remember, I showed you the chart from earlier. You see we have 190,000 students a day. We were at 70-something thousand just 7 years ago. And you go back to 2002, you're talking about just 15,000 kids on school vouchers or a tax credit scholarship back then at the time. So again, there's many arguments opponents make. I don't have enough time to explore one of those, but one of the arguments we see today is that school choice is rooted in racial segregation. It has its foundation there. In the civil rights movement, when there was a push to integrate public schools, people turned to vouchers to escape integrated public schools. And they also tend to make, especially here in Florida, the argument that kind of flows from that public education, public schooling is foundational to American democracy. What I'm going to show you today is that these arguments are flawed because they're forgetting more than a century of education that happened before that. Randy Weingarten, the president of one of the teachers union, famously remarked that vouchers were the polite cousin to racial segregation. But that got me thinking, if vouchers are cousins to segregation, well, who are the parents? And that led me right back here to Florida. Again, Florida is this excellent state that you can turn to as an example of things that go right with school choice. There's so many arguments that can be made with Florida as an example, and this is one of the best cases you're going to see about that. So here we see this guy named William N. Sheets. In 1885, he was the Alachua County Superintendent of Public Instruction. He was also the chairman of the Education Committee in Florida's Constitutional Convention of 1885. Now, this convention was trying to replace the Constitution of 1868, which Democrats at the time regarded as a carpetbagger constitution that disempowered whites and Democrats in the state, and they wanted to rewrite that constitution. William Sheets would go on after this convention to become the state's first elected superintendent of public instruction, and he would be known as Florida's little giant of education, or Florida's progressive educator. He was really the guy that modernized Florida's school system. He helped create the regulations and rules that put in place to create a uniform system of public schools. He modernized our system of hiring and training and certifying teachers. And he was also the guy that wrote this, Article 12, Section 12 of Florida's Constitution. White and colored children shall not be taught in the same school, but impartial provision shall be made for both. It was a public school leader who created racial segregation in Florida's Constitution, an amendment that would last in Florida until 1968. Sheets also imposed rules on public schools, such as public schools could not employ a white teacher to teach black students. They could not hire a teacher, black or white, who was educated at a racially integrated college. And he mandated that all dollars raised for black schools be kept separate from dollars raised for white schools. Also, textbooks for white kids had to be kept in separate rooms. Now, when public schools in Florida were essentially shirking their responsibility to educate black students, there were other organizations that were creating private schools to do the job for them. One of them was called the American Missionary Association. Pre-Civil War, this was an abolitionist organization dedicated to eradicating the scourge of slavery in America. After the Civil War, they dedicated their mission to establishing private schools with privately funded money for the freed slaves and their children. And their mission called for them to create these schools and run these schools until a local municipality would either take over the private school and use public funds to support them, or would establish a public school for Black students, allowing them to shut down their private school. One of the schools they established was called Orange Park Normal and Industrial School in Orange Park, Florida, just west of Jacksonville. This is a picture of the school from the American Missionary Association's historical archives in Orange Park. And when the school opened, I believe it opened in 1891, it opened to 26 students. It had a little dorm that students could stay in. By 1894, this was a well-regarded school with an excellent educational program. It initially started out as grades 1 through 8, but they added grades 9 through 12, including vocational training, college preparatory work, and teacher training for girls. This school ended up becoming quite the high-quality school, winning a number of prizes and local competitions. And in 1894, there is something interesting that the local reverend wrote to the AMA regarding the school. He said, on this very spot, where less than a generation ago, gangs of slaves toiled under the overseer's lash, and within a rifle shot of the plantation whipping post, their children are now developing into worthy citizenship. And youth, both white and colored, are growing up into enlightened Christian manhood and womanhood. Did you hear that correctly? White and colored children together. Orange Park Normal and Industrial School may have been Florida's first racially integrated school. And it was doing this 60 years before the civil rights movement would tackle that job in public education, and more than 70 years before Florida would remove racial segregation for our own state constitution. Well, William Sheets, Florida's now statewide superintendent of public instruction, heard a rumor that this Orange Park Normal Industrial School was employing white teachers to teach Black students. So he wrote them a letter to ask them about this. And Principal Amos Farnham had a problem with being honest, even though he knew it would bring the school a lot of trouble. He wrote back that, yep, we are employing white teachers to teach Black students. This was something that was not allowed in the public schools. But William Sheets really couldn't touch the private schools without any changes in the law. But Principal Farnham also mentioned that they were teaching white kids the same classrooms as Black kids, and that white kids and Black kids were eating together in their cafeteria, and white kids and Black kids were living together in the dormitory, and white kids and Black kids were playing marbles and other games in the field. He said, "We do not refuse anyone on account of race." And this was said in 1894. If that's not mind-blowing to you, I don't know what is. That's pretty amazing to me. Now, William Sheets was absolutely enraged. He called this school a social and moral blotch, a vile encroachment upon our social and moral system. And he dedicated his career to destroying this school. He spent almost 2 years trying to lobby the state legislature to come up with a law to eradicate this school. You can see from these pictures here, there's actual pictures from the AMA's historical archives, white and Black children in 1894, 1895, I believe, in class together. On the right, you have the boys in their wood shop. On the left, the girls are doing home ec classes together. So William Sheets created this law that would prohibit white and Black children from living in the same dormitories together, being educated in the same classrooms together by the same teacher. And this law would impact both public and private schools. Teachers, donors, principals could all be fined up to $500 and imprisoned for 3 to 6 months. Now, to put that in a modern perspective, here to $2,022, you're talking about $15,000 to $20,000 fine. As a teacher, that's like a third of your salary, maybe more. And 6 months in prison for the crime of teaching a student that's a different race than you. It took a while, but William Sheets was able to pressure a local sheriff to indict the nest of vile fanatics at Orange Park Normal and Industrial School. In 1896, Clay County officials arrested the principal, 5 teachers, the school's patron, they're a donor, and the local minister for supporting this school. Now, these arrests sent shockwaves through Florida. Schools for black students across the state, talking about private schools for black students across the state, shuttered. They all feared being arrested for the crime of having white teachers teaching black students. Again, it was very difficult to get, black teachers that met his teacher certification requirements, which included not being educated at a racially integrated college, where most black teachers probably would have been educated at the time if they weren't attending a historical black college at the time. Also happening, William Sheets was able to resoundingly defeat his opponent in the statewide election for superintendent of public instruction. The arrest of these teachers made him extremely popular, got him reelected. Also, there was Plessy v. Ferguson happening that year. That was the Supreme Court case that ruled that separate but equal was constitutional. So it really looked like this school was going to lose, and the local newspapers were actually rooting in favor of the state and the public school leader. But in October of 1896, they got their day in court. They argued that this was unconstitutional, a violation of their rights, and they won, though they ended up winning on a technicality. They won because it was ruled that the law's title was longer than the actual and not descriptive enough for the actual effect of the law. And so William Sheets vowed that he was going to go back to the legislature the next year and get that fixed and get that school shut down. Now, he wasn't able to do that anytime soon. And by 1904, he was voted out of office for not being racist enough against black Floridians. Ironically, the Florida Education Association's vice president saw to it that he didn't get elected for not being racist enough. She was not only mad that he revoked her teaching license, but was upset that he had Booker T. Washington present to a bunch of white teachers, a black man doing a presentation in the lecture for white teachers. So in 1904, he lost the election. But in 1906, Clay County, where the school is located, built a white school, and the school lost a lot of the private school lost a lot of their white students. In 1911, it's believed the Klan burnt down the school's church. And by 1912, William Sheets, after an 8-year absence, gets reelected and immediately sets out to getting Sheets Law passed again, this time fixing the problem with the title that got the law overturned before. In 1913, Orange Park Normal Industrial School, low on students, low on funds, weathered by 22 years of hostility from a state and a public school system that wanted to see a racially integrated private school shut down for good, actually closed its doors. They gave up. But taking up the mantle was St. Benedict de Moore School in St. Augustine, Florida. It was a Catholic school, also founded to educate black students for freed slaves and their descendants. And in this case, these Catholic sisters were arrested and charged with the crime of being white while teaching black students. And they too argued that this case was unconstitutional. This time they won on a little better grounds. The judge said that a white teacher has the ability to sell their services to whoever they wanted. Going along with that would be unsaid, but the black teacher could also sell their services to whoever they wanted. It was a property right in your job skill that you could teach to whomever you wanted, at least in a private school anyway. And one other school I want to bring to your attention was another AMA school called Fessenden Academy. It operated from 1861 to 1951. Unlike the other two, it was staffed entirely by a black educated staff. It had black teachers, black principal, and it ran to 1951. If you recall from earlier, I said that the AMA created private schools and kept them running until the public school system either built a school or took over the private one they were operating. That means in this rural area of Florida, black students didn't have a public school to attend until half the century was already over. Now, anyone who's arguing that school vouchers and private school choice is rooted in racism is clearly starting their history in the 1950s and 60s and forgetting everything else that happened. Because this time before that, private schools were educating Black students when public schools were not. They picked up the mantle and they provided an education for thousands of students across the South, perhaps millions of students across the South, when the public school system would not. And in Florida in particular, at least one of those schools was racially integrated decades before the public schools ever were. And anyone arguing that public schools are foundational to American democracy really have to ask themselves, can something so foundational to our democracy be so exclusive? That's a question I leave to you to ask any opponents that might be trying to make this argument in your state. And one final thing, I also encourage you to check out my colleague Ron Matus's little Twitter feed here. If you're in a state that's a large rural population, a lot of rural Republicans specifically like to oppose school choice, saying that it won't benefit children in rural schools, rural areas, but this is not true. It's not what we're seeing in Florida. We've got a very healthy and robust rural private school system and charter school system here in Florida, and the parents in these rural areas are very happy. That's his Twitter handle and number there. I also put it in the chat if you want to check that out. It's a wonderful little feed discussion on that. He's got a couple of articles. You can also reach out to me at pgibbons@sufs.org. I'll be happy to send this PowerPoint presentation to you or answer any questions that you have. And that's the end of my presentation. So I'll stop sharing and take any questions if there are any.
Wow, Patrick, thank you very much for walking us through the history of Florida's education and how much the dynamic between public and private has impacted, and a number of the fallacies that we have in our kind of view of what's happened across time and in history. As a comment, and by the way, if anyone has any questions, please pop in the chat or in the Q&A, and I know Patrick will be happy to answer. I recently was listening to, on the way home from a soccer tournament for my son, Murray Rothbard's book, For a New Liberty. And in there, he alleges that in 1922, Oregon outlawed private schools, and it was later overturned.
Yeah.
You may be familiar with this. Yeah. I had never heard this before, and I'd read the book, but I didn't recall this. And so it did get overturned in 1925, and the courts, of course, made all these statements about human liberty and that the state can't do that. It's not just a toy for the state. But the driver of the push that I found was shocking, and maybe it lines up with what you're talking about, was the Ku Klux Klan at the time. They had quite a bit of power, apparently, in the North. And the reason that Murray Rothbard suggests was that they didn't want parochial schools to be learning what they were learning, and they suggested that canceling private schools was necessary for the preservation of free institutions.
Yeah.
And yet we don't learn these things, and it's so important to have this history brought back in front of us for what actually happened.
Yeah, that's one of the myths that people consistently bring up, is that public education has always been non-religious, that it's always been inclusive, and it's always about promoting diversity and democracy. And what we really see is that public education was very much, when it was growing in the 1800s, was very much about uniformity, oneness, assimilating immigrants. And so especially if you were a Catholic immigrant to America, you were seen as something hostile to the Anglo-Saxon Protestant majority. You were beholden to the Pope in Rome. And in fact, Florida has this really kooky governor that got elected around, I think, 1914, who ended up using the Sisters of St. Joseph case where the Catholic sisters were arrested as an example of Catholics trying to ruin the good Southern social order where whites are on top and blacks are on bottom. And this whole conspiracy theory about Catholics were storing munitions and arms in Catholic churches to arm black residents, and they're going to rise up on behalf of the German Kaiser and fight for the Pope. The German Kaiser was a Protestant, and the Pope was a pacifist at the time. So it's just this bonkers thing going on. But it was always about assimilating minorities. It was not about diversity. Real diversity is giving people the option to let them pick the schools from a healthy and robust menu of educational choices. That's real diversity.
Love that. I wonder if you touched on this, and it was one of my favorite points among the many that you put in, and that was the indirect effect of competition, that when you expand school choice, that it even impacts public schools. I thought that's a brilliant point, and I think people miss that. Either they ignore the data or just not aware of it.
Yeah. Now, me personally, I have found that the moral argument for school choice is more persuasive because you get giving people educational options is just the morally right thing to do. Making them stay in a school based on their zip code, it just strikes me as morally wrong. If the school is not working for them, you just tell them too bad, just wait it out. That doesn't sit well with me morally. The morally right thing to do is give them options, let the parents find the school that works for them. The side benefit, it turns out, is that public schools want to keep these kids. The teachers in public schools, the principals in public schools, they're not dummies. They're smart people. They're college educated. And when kids are leaving, the money's leaving following those kids. And these teachers and these principals want to figure out how to keep these kids from leaving. And if the only way they can do that is to improve the quality of the education, well, that's what they're going to do. And that's what we've seen in Florida. As the FTC program has ramped up in size, public school quality has increased. These public schools are working to convince parents to stay. You've got options. You got charter schools, you got private schools, you got home schools. We want you to stay here. Here's why. We can provide a superior education. Here's why. Let me prove it to you. And they're doing that in some cases. That's great.
Yeah, love that. One of my good friends is actually been involved with the idea of public schools from Texas. And I'm not sure if you're aware, but they're expanding into Jacksonville, into the Tampa area. And one of the things they talk about quite a bit is their focus on Title I districts. That's your lowest performing, clearly, areas. They have a 99% graduation rate. And they have to pass 11 AP courses. It's absolutely outstanding. And they ask parents for two things if they're going to choose to go to an institution as a school. That is, please bring them in on time. And if we need to work with them and remediate, we just ask that you not pick them up. To have those kind of returns, regardless of familial situation, kind of breaks that idea that it's only family effect that can have that. And family's huge, obviously. Huge, huge, huge. However, the impact of a school is just tremendous. And these kids are going to like University of Chicago. They're headed to other Ivy League schools, outstanding individuals in a rigorous program. It's just, you can see that the expansion of school choice really does benefit them.
Yeah, and that's pretty amazing to hear because Florida is really brutal and strict on charter schools, more strict than public schools because they're required to meet certain academic benchmarks and performances. And if they don't meet these, they can get shut down pretty quickly. It takes like 2 or 3 years of not meeting these benchmarks. And Florida, the school district will shut these charter schools down. It's not something that happens to the district school, of course. And so that's made it very difficult for charter schools to set up and establish themselves in areas that need the most help. So it's really amazing to hear that they're succeeding that well because Florida can be a pretty tough place to operate a charter school in a low-income area. So that's really great for them.
Absolutely. I don't know if I mentioned to you, but I'm on the board of directors of a charter school, and I can absolutely attest to what you were just saying. We actually ended up with an A in our first year in a pandemic year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
And you know what? We wear that on our sleeve, right? I'm very proud of the fact that I'm deeply involved, as are the other board members and administrators. Their heart and soul is in the school and preserving the institution. And you're right. We need to get to high-performing charter status. The rigor that it takes to get there is really intense.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I see that we have a minute left. If I can ask if there's just one or two things you really want parents or educators to walk away with, and something that can be actionable, what could they do or what should they know?
There's a lot, really. I don't know if I can pick one thing. For parents, it's do your homework. There's so many, especially in Florida, there's so many school choice options. Finding the right one for your child is incredibly important. And just don't get stuck in a school. If you pick a school that's not working, find another one. That's what school choice is all about. We're not about keeping you stuck in a private school or a charter school if it's not working for you. So keep looking, doing your homework, and you will find a home for your child. You will find a place for them to succeed.
That's fantastic. What a great way to end. Well, Patrick, I want to thank you so much for your time and for all of your knowledge and your deep research here. I can't wait to share this presentation. It's been recorded, obviously, with others, and everyone in the room. We trust you enjoyed the session. There's obviously much more to come, and as I mentioned, if you missed any portions, just know the recordings will be available for you to come back to over and over again. And just a quick reminder, if you don't mind, on the right-hand side is a quick poll for the event before you exit to your next presentation. I'm sure we'd love to have some feedback. Thank you so much for attending. Patrick, once again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.